These are the voices of resilience, of courage, of families who refuse to let a diagnosis define them.
My name is Victoria. I'm 25 years old and I have Addison's disease. I was 12 years old when I first started to develop my first symptoms, but I didn't get my Addison's diagnosis until I was 24. It took 12 years for me to finally be diagnosed, and those years were filled with a lot of suffering, misdiagnoses and mistreatment at the hands of doctors and the medical system. I used to be a track and field athlete, but that was before I was forced to quit due to my illnesses, and I had hopes to qualify for World Juniors for the heptathlon. I started to get really dizzy when I ran, and that was really my first symptom, and that's where the whole journey began. I went to my family doctor where I was first diagnosed with exercise-induced asthma, then performance anxiety when the puffer they prescribed me didn't work. These symptoms continued to get worse, and I started to lose my hearing, my vision, and then I lost full control of my body when I was running. I kept falling and hitting my head because of this, and I even broke my wrist while running the 200 meters at nationals. So ultimately I had to give up on my passion for track and field. It was around this time where mental illness, which is another symptom of Addison's disease, it really took over my life. Because I developed some pretty severe mental illness, doctors began to latch on to the idea that any physical symptoms I was experiencing were all in my head. I was getting worse and worse physically, with symptoms progressing to every day rather than just when I was exercising. All while my symptoms were being ignored more and more than ever. This was my life from the years 2015 to 2023, and I was so incredibly miserable. I had tried seeing some specialists in the States for a diagnosis of Panda's syndrome, but the treatments ultimately didn't work because it was the wrong illness. I woke up one day in early 2023 with chronic symptoms to a level that I had never experienced before. I could no longer stay awake. My chronic pain was constant. I would black out every time I would stand, and my blood pressure was extremely low. My heart rate would also go way too high. I was barely able to leave the house or my bed, and I started to use a walker when going anywhere. I couldn't stand for more than a few minutes at a time. I suddenly had over 40 symptoms that made me unable to function, and I had little to no help from my doctor at the time. My life became small and miserable. I'm not sure how Addison's disease was first brought up, but it was shot down pretty early by my family doctor. They did some blood tests, but they ignored and dismissed the results, which was a common theme for any possible diagnosis that was ever brought up. I have a family friend with Addison's disease, and my dad encouraged me to reach out to her to talk about my symptoms because hers seemed to be really similar to mine. We got together for coffee in the fall of 2023, and I was explaining my symptoms to her, and she told me it was like looking in a mirror because our symptoms were almost identical. She became my mentor, and she helped me to figure out what test to ask for. I began seeing her doctor in the emergency room, and when I saw him for the first time, I cried. Up until meeting him, I had never been listened to or validated by any doctor. Seeing him made me feel seen and heard, and after that first meeting with him, a plan was put into place with the goal of seeing if I had Addison's, because he agreed that I likely did. I suddenly had hoped that maybe this nightmare would get better soon. All I wanted at that point was a diagnosis. After years and years of being dismissed, being told there's nothing wrong with me or that it was just mental health. In April 2024, I was finally diagnosed with Addison's disease, and I immediately started cortisol. From that first day on hydrocortisone, I felt better, when no medication had ever helped me feel any better before. In those first few days of taking it, I remember saying that I felt like myself again. Since getting on the right dose, I've gotten a lot of my life back. I started college for recreation therapy last fall, and I've made some friends, I went on a trip, and I've gained some of my personality back. Addison's disease still affects me every day, some days more than others, but I've learned to manage my symptoms to the best of my ability. My diagnosis journey isn't over yet, and it's expected that I have more than one other autoimmune condition that's still undiagnosed. I'm also switching treatment methods from pills to a cortisol pump, so I'm really excited to see how much my pump might further increase my quality of life. Now that I'm diagnosed and I have a good doctor and I'm on a successful treatment plan, my life has become easier than pre-diagnosis, but my life is still quite hard because of chronic illness. I find that there is absolutely nothing that's more frustrating than being held back from something you really, really want to do because of symptoms. And there's just so many of those decisions that go into the everyday life of having Addison's. You have to pay for your time and for your energy levels, so you have to properly prepare in advance and manage your time wisely for the things that you want and that you need to do. You can't just do what you want when you want to do it, and you have to rest, properly dose, and allocate your time to an activity in order to be able to do it, to survive it, and to not pay for it in the next little while through a symptom flare-up. Sometimes I have to cancel doing things that I want to do because my body isn't up to doing it, and that's just very frustrating for me. I struggle with expectations, both of myself and with what others put on me. At the end of the day, I still have an illness, even though it's invisible. I often am pretending that I'm fine, even though I feel like I'm maybe almost asleep, I'm in intense pain, or I'm dizzy, or my heart is pounding out of my chest for no apparent reason. I have to live my everyday life with symptoms that would send a non-chronically ill person to the emergency room, yet I'm having to do things like socialize or write a test while I'm having symptoms. I wish sometimes that people would be able to realize the extent of the symptoms I'm having in any given moment, or that I'd magically be able to allow them to feel things that I feel just for a few seconds so that they'd understand. I struggle a lot with grief. I spend a lot of time grieving the life I had before I got sick and the life I could have had without chronic illness. I mourn the loss of that version of myself, and that sometimes can be a paralyzing feeling. I wonder if I would have gone on my track scholarship to a university in the States as I had planned, or if I would have made it to Worlds like I had dreamed of, or what I would have done with all those years I had lost to my illnesses. I consider myself a strong person after all the trauma and suffering I went through with chronic and mental illness, but sometimes it all becomes too much and I can't be strong anymore. I feel stuck in my illnesses, and my symptoms make it so that I can't get comfortable, and suddenly life doesn't seem worth living again. It's hard not to fall back into the depths of mental illness, but I'm grateful to be on the other side and thriving again with the proper treatment and support systems. Almost all of the doctors I've had throughout my chronic illness journey treated me as though I was a bother to them. I wasn't a simple fix, and they didn't know what was wrong with me, so they dismissed me and blamed my symptoms on me and my mental health. They even blamed my family, telling my mom that she had Munchausen by proxy and that she was making me sick on purpose for attention. My life could have been so much easier, and I could have had so much less suffering if I had just been listened to and taken care of by my care team instead of being invalidated and sent away. I think sometimes that a doctor's ego can get into the way, and they don't want to tell you that they don't know what's going on with you. I wish that doctors were able to be honest when they didn't understand and tried to send you on to another that might be able to help. There's no shame in not knowing, but there is shame in needlessly prolonging someone's suffering. They teach doctors in medical school, when you hear hoofbeats, look for horses, not zebras. Meaning, when somebody comes to you with an illness, look for common causes and not rare illnesses. I partly understand why they teach this, but another part of me doesn't, because there are so many of us with rare diseases. And unfortunately, a lot of us have similar stories of doctors just not taking us seriously and refusing to look for zebras just because they weren't as common as the horses. I really wish that doctors would be open to any diagnosis. Just because a rare disease is less common, we're still here. We exist. And if anything, we need more care and attention than the common illnesses. I'm proud to be rare.